Today, on the 15th anniversary of his death, we'll be discussing singer Michael Jackson, and we'll be discussing the drug Propofol. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Now, Michael Jackson died 15 years ago on June 25th, 2009. So today we'll be discussing his life, and we will definitely be discussing his controversies. So Michael Jackson died of a Propofol overdose administered by his doctor. So in our second half, we're going to discuss this drug. I just said he was dead. Remember what I said?
Oh, yeah, right.
Right. So I guess people might be wondering why we're talking about Michael Jackson. I mean, it is the 15th anniversary of his death. It seems simultaneously like it was a long time ago and it just happened. And I don't know, it's an interesting person to talk about because some of you might be thinking, why are you talking about this guy? This guy was clearly a pedophile. Why are we talking about this? And other people, when we bring up these allegations, people might be like, why are you besmirching the name of Michael Jackson? It's a very unusual situation.
Thou must not besmirch. It is very unusual, but he's an insanely beloved person, one of the most beloved pop stars of all time. And we've talked about this kind of thing on this podcast, right, Asif? This idea of like separating the art from the artist. And we mentioned, Woody Allen and Bill Cosby and this, but Michael Jackson seems to have created even more difficulty for so many people. I remember sitting in a restaurant with a friend of mine, Patrick, and all this information had come out about Michael Jackson. They were no longer allegations. It seemed like it's true. And Patrick said to me, dude, we will never hear another Michael Jackson song as long as we live. You will never be going into a bar or a club or a cafe and hear a Michael Jackson song. Like it is over. And at the time I agreed. I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. And in fact, it hasn't been true. So I think we'll discuss that as well. And how kind of strange and weird that all is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So why don't we get into it? Let's talk a bit about Michael Jackson and his early life. He was the 8th child of the famed Jackson family. And of course, he joined the Jackson 5. Can you name the other people who were in the Jackson 5 when they debuted? Debuted? Is that the word?
Tito, I will always remember because he was part of a Eddie Murphy joke.
Yeah.
Give me a tissue, Tito, or something like that. Jermaine Jackson, Marlon Jackson.
Yeah.
Marlon.
And Jackie Jackson. There you
Jackie,
go.
what? There was a Jackie Jackson?
Yeah.
Did you make that up?
No, that's true. And then, of course, they became the Jacksons later on when they added more kids. I don't know what happened. Anyway, whatever. It doesn't matter. So then they started touring around in the mid-'60s, mainly in the Midwest. They play a lot of the Chitlin circuit. And Ali, I know we've talked about it before, but you want to give us lines on the Chitlin circuit?
Yeah, well, we talked about it in the context of comedy, and comedy was a much smaller part of the Chitlin circuit. It was mostly musicians, and it was like they would have been opening for Etta James and Gladys Knight and Sam and Dave and these incredible artists of the 60s. And the Chitlin circuit was a separate circuit created by Black people for Black people because they were shut out of so many white venues, and it was extremely popular and it made careers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so his parents, and of course his mother was Esther Jackson, she had aspired to be actually a country and Western performer, and she worked part-time at Sears. And you might remember that she's Jehovah's Witness. And of course that's, something Michael Jackson kind of struggled with is, how closely he adhered to that faith when he was growing up. And of course their father, Joseph, in quotation marks, Joe Jackson.
Not that Joe Jackson.
No, different
also
person
a musician
entirely.
named Joe Jackson. He was a musician too, this Joe Jackson.
So the father of these guys, Joe Jackson, he played in a local rhythm and blues band growing up in these guys grew up in Indiana, right? So he played in a
Yeah.
local rhythm and blues band. He worked as a crane operator, but he saw this potential in his kids and he pushed them.
Former pugilist as well, Asif. He was a former boxer. As we paint the story of Michael Jackson, although nothing justifies anything, he was a former boxer and a very, very tough man as
Yeah, well,
well.
let's talk a bit about that. You know, Michael Jackson has talked about the abuse that he suffered at his father's hands. He said he physically and emotionally abused him during rehearsals. Joe would sit in a chair and with a belt in his hand, ready to punish any errors that they made in their performances when they were rehearsing. Michael Jackson says Joe regularly whipped him with a belt. You know, his wife, as in Joe's wife, Esther, and the other siblings kind of like, well, that, was different. That was how people were punished back in the day. We don't really consider it abuse. So they kind of said that they don't think that their father was abusive. But a couple of things. First of all, it was. Second of all, the issue is that Michael was the youngest of all of these. So obviously, if these guys are teenagers versus a young Michael who was less than 10 at the time, like that's a very different interaction. And so it's going to scar somebody. Again, nobody's making excuses for Michael Jackson. This is just what he has told people occurred. And like I said, I don't think that his parents actually deny that they did this, but they just don't consider it abuse. So take that for what you will. So the Jacksons continued with their hits in the 70s. But I didn't realize that during that time, Michael Jackson had a bunch of solo albums that also came out at the same time. So intermixed with the Jackson 5 and Layer the Jacksons. So much so that...
What the, Asif?
Yeah?
You don't know about Off the Wall?
No, dude. Okay, don't look at our show notes. How many albums had he made before Off the Wall?
Like his own?
Yeah, solo albums.
I thought that was his debut
That's
album.
my whole point. He had 4 solo albums before Off the Wall. See, he's not even like... So that's what I'm saying. So I thought Off the Wall was his big, because that was the big hit, the big debut. But he moved from the bubblegum pop of the Jackson 5 and I guess these earlier solo records, which I didn't know about. And then, of course, Off the Wall, which, became kind of his big early hit album and his calling card. So see, Ali learned something too.
Yeah. The funniest thing will be if we get mail from listeners where they're not angry that we talked about a pedophile, but they're like, how did you not know about his first 4 albums?
Exactly.
It's a possibility.
So that was 79, and then Off the Wall came out. And then in 82, Thriller. So Thriller, I think everyone knows this album. It was the best-selling album of all time in the U.S. Yeah, okay. And the best-selling album of all time worldwide, estimated to have sold 70 million copies. So, again, I don't know how young people today relate to Michael Jackson because, of course, we're going to get into the, weirdness and then all these allegations. But he was easily, without a doubt, the biggest pop star in the world, probably the biggest entertainer in the world in the 80s. It's hard to think of somebody who was more famous than him. He co-wrote with Lionel Richie, We Are the World, which was done to raise money for the famine that was going on in Africa at the time. It raised $63 million at the time, which would be about $180 million in today's currency. And
We Are the World has a video with hundreds of performers in it almost. Seems like almost 100. How did they get all those people together, Asif? You told me the story.
Called them on the phone?
What? Didn't you tell me the story of, am I mixing it up with something else where you said everybody was there for the Grammy Awards already? So then from the Grammys, they went to record it and then they were in studio till like 5, 6 in the morning?
I think that's true. I don't know if I said that or not. But they have a whole documentary about this that's, I believe, on streaming where you can watch the whole...
Who else have I been talking to? What other friends do I have?
So, anyway, yes, we'll fact check that to see if that's true or not. But it's interesting, and I haven't watched the documentary, and I don't know, again, if they bring up these allegations. And, again, we will talk about those in just a minute. Other big things that happened in the 80s with Michael Jackson, he had this Pepsi commercial. He signed a huge endorsement deal with Pepsi. And he did this commercial in 1984, and I guess in that commercial, the pyrotechnics went off accidentally and set his hair on fire, which caused second-degree burns on his scalp. So I'm sure that's quite painful. He apparently went under treatment to hide the scars. And then he said at one point that that's when he got his first nose job, his rhinoplasty at the time. But in fact, apparently that was actually his third rhinoplasty. So he's slowly been having plastic surgery over time. One of the things, by the way, that his father said to Michael is that you have a fat nose. Okay. And if you look at, of course, Michael's nose when he was a kid up to the point of when he died, it looks completely different, right? So he clearly has that plastic surgery. The amount that he's had, I don't know if it's ever been quantified properly, but it's happened several times. The other thing that's important at the time in the 80s is that he bought this Neverland Ranch in California, which cost about $17 million at the time, so equivalent to $44 million in today's currency. And at the time, he bought this 2,700 acres. He put in a Ferris wheel, a carousel, a movie theater, a zoo, had it patrolled by security guards. It's featured in this documentary, Leaving Neverland, which we'll talk about in a minute. And yeah, it looks incredible, like in terms of what he did with this place. But yeah, it's quite interesting. So $17 million for that. And then, of course, the other thing that Jackson is known for is his philanthropy.
Which is what actually complicates,
of course,
many people's feelings, probably, right? People forgetting that multiple things about a human being can be true at the same time.
He was described by this journal, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, as having paved the way for the current surge in celebrity philanthropy, as in the 80s, 90s, and present. And the Los Angeles Times said he set the standard for generosity for other entertainers. And so, it's tough to reconcile these things, as you said. And so in terms of just the music and then all these things he's contributed, he is considered one of the best-selling musical artists in history. They say he has an estimated 500 million records sold worldwide, 13 number one singles in the US, more than any other male artist. He's had I think 39 Guinness World Records set, 13 Grammy Awards, 26 American Music Awards, a bunch of Lifetime Achievement Awards. The Lunar Society in 2009, so this is shortly after his death, a month after his death, named a crater on the moon after Michael Jackson. There's an extinct hermit crab that's named after him. It's called Mesoparapylocales Michael Jacksoni.
What a shame that Michael's not alive to see that incredible honor.
World Vitiligo Day was celebrated on June 25th. And of course, he had vitiligo. Probably the most famous person who's ever suffered from this. If you want to check out vitiligo, it's in our archives. And that's paired with a discussion about how you separate the art from the artist. So check that out in our archives. Interestingly, his dermatologist who diagnosed him with vitiligo is a guy named Arnold Klein. And you might wonder, well, why am I mentioning this guy's name? Because Arnold Klein had an assistant in his office named Debbie Rowe. And who is Debbie Rowe? Debbie Rowe is the second wife and mother of Michael Jackson's first two children.
You got it.
His third, the baby who was named Blanket.
Nickname Blanket.
Yes. And he goes by BG or something now.
Okay, but he was named Prince.
Yeah,
Michael
but
Jackson.
It's very weird with his kids because his daughter is named Paris. Then his second son is named Prince, but I guess his name is actually Michael Jackson Jr. So the reason why he's called Prince is because he's the son of the king of pop. But then this third kid is actually named Prince, but he's actually doesn't go by Prince. He went by Blanket and then went by whatever his name is now.
And that's probably the least weird things about those kids, if we're being honest. I mean, growing up in the shadow of Michael Jackson and everything strange, weird, and criminal going on God, can't even imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's probably time to talk about these allegations. And so there were several allegations brought about him. This is in the early 90s about sexual impropriety with young boys. So always boys around the same age. And some of them had these allegations. Some of them had court cases brought against them. Some of them had civil cases brought against him. Interestingly, one of the first accusers, they ended up settling their civil case for $23 million. Why am I pointing out that amount of money? Because that's more than he paid for Neverland Ranch, where, of course, a lot of these abuses occurred. And, they said, oh, we did that to kind of settle, to keep the, just to make it go away. And then people don't always ascribe guilt to when there's settlements, but I think there's certainly been a pattern with all these accusers. One of these accusers was a Make-A-Wish child who had cancer, which is also concerning. And then I think, so all these allegations were there, and people are like, it's strange, and his behavior is so strange, but maybe he's just a childlike person. And then about 5 years ago, this documentary, Leaving Neverland, came out. It was a two-part documentary. It was broadcast on HBO. Then Oprah did a special afterwards. And the two accusers, one of them, as a child, was a child actor. He was in a Pepsi commercial with Michael Jackson, and that's how his family got to know him. Another one was a dancer from Australia who then, again, met Michael Jackson during a tour there, and then their family became friends with him. And he's actually an extremely famous choreographer, Wade Robson. He choreographed NSYNC. He's co-written songs with NSYNC. He's extremely well known. And so I watched these documentaries in preparation for this podcast. I thought to myself, I haven't watched them. It's been 5 years. I should probably watch them. And there probably are subconscious reasons why I didn't watch them. And I told Ali after I watched them, I'm like, maybe you shouldn't watch them and go into this, without having recently seen this. So you didn't watch them, right, Ali, based on that recommendation?
I did not. I followed your instructions.
So, I mean, you watch this and you see these two men and what they went through as children. And in my opinion, there is no doubt in my mind they're telling the truth. Like, there is no doubt. It's clear that this happened, right? And the mental gymnastics you have to do to say why this didn't happen is crazy. Why would... If anybody said, oh, hey, we have these boys who are like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they're going to share a bed with an adult grown man, like, nobody would ever let their child do that. It's impossible. But yet, this is what happened.
That definitely muddies the waters. The pedophilia is clear. You start getting into, and because I think the parents of these kids probably suffered from some kind of I'm saying suffered, but as though it's a syndrome, but it almost is hero worship, right? It's probably a hero of theirs. And he wants to, have a sleepover with our children. We're so blessed and so lucky to have it. And, I don't know. Every interview I saw with Michael Jackson in the last 10 years of his life, I was like, this guy keeps getting a little weirder and weirder.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And so then, and I don't know. I mean, I think he was a weird person, but maybe that's how people were excusing things, right? Well, he's just weird. He kind of acts like a kid himself. So, of course, it's innocent when he's with kids. And that's probably what these parents did. The documentary...
Didn't he dangle a child over a balcony once?
Yeah, blanket. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
Is that childlike?
I mean, yeah, there's so many issues with him.
So many issues. Where do you start?
We'll get into some of his mental health stuff in the second half, but yeah, and you watch the documentary. First of all, do I recommend people watch it? Yes. Is it disturbing? Of course it is. It's very disturbing. It's very graphic in terms of their descriptions, and you might be like, oh yeah, that's really upsetting. I'm not sure I want to watch that. I'm like, well, they went through it. So, they had to live with this. They still have to live with this, the ramifications of what happened to them. So, do I think, 4 hours of your time feeling uncomfortable is worth it? Probably. But the most interesting thing in the documentary is the last few minutes where they talk to the two mothers, these now men, but who were boys at the time. And they basically say what you said, Ali. They were, Michael Jackson become friends with their family. He'd come over for dinner all the time, just pop into the family that lived in the Los Angeles area. Both women said they regarded Michael Jackson as one of their sons. Like, that's how closely they felt. And when he died, they were so upset. And of course, they feel complicit in this because they're the ones who, the Australian family moved to Los Angeles to be closer to Michael Jackson. These people let their sons spend ridiculous amount of times with Michael Jackson alone with no other supervision. And of course they feel guilt about this. And of course they're not sure they can ever forgive themselves for it. So it's all very messy. But I think the more interesting thing is what you talked about, Ali, which is why, given this documentary has come out, I mean, Michael Jackson's estate obviously disputes it, but they have reasons to dispute it. Did you know, Ali, that Forbes has recognized Michael Jackson as one of the top earning dead celebrities since his death? And he had the top spot for a decade from 2013 to 2023.
And where does that money go?
To his estate. And it makes at least $100 million a year. Often it has been more than that, but through various sales and things like that. But, there are people who have a vested interest in keeping the Michael Jackson name not just alive, but untarnished, right?
Mm-hmm,
and so this is the most interesting part about this is, like, I remember I went to Las Vegas and I was going to see a Cirque du Soleil show with my family. And they still have Michael Jackson's Cirque du Soleil show with Michael Jackson as like the main kind of theme character. I'm like, what are we doing here? What is happening? And why does he get a pass in this? Well, Bill Cosby, nobody just sits down like, oh yeah, let's just watch an old episode of the Cosby Show. Yeah, I could put aside all that sexual assault stuff.
There are tens of thousands of people who still say Bill Cosby's innocent and how dare you tarnish his name. And, there's hero worship of Bill Cosby as well. 50-something women, I think it was in the 60s, women came forward, didn't want any money. And it was still like, no, they're trying to take a great man down. And right, you just can't, you cannot, it's like, it is some level of, cognitive dissonance on steroids, basically, where you're like, if I've loved this man or this person for so many years, and this person is that horrific thing, what does that say about me?
Exactly.
Right? So it's more like you can't accept it about yourself as much as you can't accept it about Michael Jackson. But like I said, there was just a weirder and weirder, his voice, his look, his mannerisms. It was all getting stranger and stranger. For me, it was a leap, but a leap I was willing to take. I was like, yeah, I can see that.
And I know what you're saying, because when I look at the older stuff, that to me, this is just, again, it's probably some sort of cognitive dissonance, that stuff from Off the Wall and Thriller. I'm like, okay, well, that's a bit different. Those songs are a bit different. And then as you get to the more recent songs that are now associated with this time where this controversy was occurring, he was probably a bad person all this time, but for whatever reason, we associate only now after these controversies came out that you associate with these songs. So I don't know. It is a complicated situation. And I think it's like you said, people want to dichotomize something, good or bad. Michael Jackson is good. He's amazing. He's an amazing recording artist. He's so influential. He has contributed all this money to charity. How could he have done these things? Other people want to say, well, he's an evil person and you can't discount, maybe the charity should give back the money, or maybe, we should strip him from all these awards. I don't know. Like, it's people want to dichotomize something as being good or bad, but the truth is it's complicated, right? That's the real truth.
Yeah. What's also complicated is the fact that I've heard Michael Jackson in cafes, bars, and clubs 100 times since my buddy told me we will never hear his music again.
I know. It's just so interesting where I don't get it. And then there's other stories which are true about celebrities, but nobody even advertised them. Did you know that Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, this is true, because he says it in his biography, his autobiography, that he got together when he was 23 with a 16-year-old, and he wanted to be able to travel around, like, touring with her. So he got guardianship of the 16-year-old so he could do this without alerting the authorities type thing.
Right. Without legal consequences.
And then you're like, oh my God. And this person is, of course, suing him now for years of trauma. But he admits to this in his autobiography. Like, what? It's crazy. So, again, did anybody know this? Why are these things not discussed? Why would we give Steven Tyler a pass and not? It's all very bizarre. And I don't know, like, how I deal with this, right? Like, you hear a Michael Jackson song come on, then what do you, like, do we turn it off? Do we let our kids listen to it or not? I don't know. It's very difficult.
Okay, so what we're talking about in the medical world today connects to Michael Jackson, as he died of an overdose of Propofol. So I want to talk about Propofol, but I also want to talk about, you mentioned Arnold Klein. He said in an interview that Jackson used an anesthesiologist to administer propofol to help him sleep while he was on the History World Tour, particularly when he was on tour in Germany. I don't know what kept him up in Germany. The anesthesiologist would, quote, take him down at night and, quote, bring him back up in the morning during that tour, 1996, 1997. Is that a thing? What is that? What is, so this guy, he overdosed from this. So I want to know about this drug, where it's administered. Is it only anesthesiologists who are allowed to use it, who know how to use it? Why would Michael Jackson be using it? Why did he die of it? And let's talk about the other things that were also in his system.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good points. So maybe we should start with what else was in his system, the circumstance of his death, and then we can kind of answer some of these questions, Ali. So,
yeah,
I guess, Michael Jackson clearly had some issues, mental health and otherwise, but he had insomnia for a long time. We should do a separate episode entirely on insomnia, maybe get some experts to talk about it. But in my basic opinion, insomnia is often due to anxiety or stress. How about this? You need to make sure that's not the cause, for someone who's insomnia, because it's in vast majority of people.
That's the first thing you want to look at.
Yeah. So Jackson, separate from those anesthesiologists that he was employing in Germany, whoever those people were, and separate from Dr. Klein, who was his dermatologist and his friend, apparently, Jackson had a personal physician named Conrad Murray. So he being Jackson, would contact Conrad Murray to help him sleep. So to help Jackson sleep, obviously. So he would prescribe him various things. And he would most often prescribe what are called benzodiazepines. So benzodiazepines, the ones that people are familiar with.
Not milk and a hand massage?
No.
Warm milk?
No.
Chamomile?
No, exactly. And not even melatonin, which we've also talked about in the podcast before. Check our archives for that one. So benzodiazepines, I think we've talked about them before, but these are medications. So the ones that you guys might be familiar with are Ativan, Valium, Xanax. These are all different forms of benzodiazepines. They're different in that they have different half-lives, but they all act similarly. And so one of the issues is that this guy would prescribe all of these at the same time to Michael Jackson. And in fact, they found multiple of these benzodiazepines in his body. So you should not be doing this, prescribing multiple ones. That's not appropriate. The only time I would ever do that is if someone was taking one of these regularly to prevent seizures, because we can use them to prevent seizures, and then say they had a really prolonged full body seizure and you need something to stop it immediately, you give them an extra dose of a medication. But otherwise, you should not be combining these different types of benzodiazepines together. That's completely ridiculous.
And they are all three meant for sleep assistance?
No, so that's a good point. So he was on
your nerves.
Apparently diazepam, lorazepam, and midazolam. So they cause a decrease in your central nervous system function. That's how they work, by inhibiting various neurotransmitters, or a better way to put that is they increase inhibition in the brain is probably a better way to say that. So they will decrease brain activity. So that means that they will make you tired.
They will decrease your anxiety, presumably.
Yeah, because you're getting tired. Okay, so now and then it will decrease. It will cause more inhibition in your brain, so inhibit some of that anxiety. Okay, so that's why people use them. But it's very clear in the medical literature these are supposed to be used for something like anxiety on a very short-term basis. They're not good for long-term because they have addictive potential. You can overdose and die from them. And your body does get used to them over time. So you need to take more and more of them to get the same effect, which is probably why this guy's combining all these different ones together, because it's not working over time, right?
Right. And also connected to what we spoke about in the first half, there's probably things Michael Jackson was doing in life that kept him awake and anxious.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, yeah, we can presume, hopefully he felt some anxiety about his behavior. So can you use these for sleep? You can. I personally don't recommend it as sleep. And even if it is prescribed for sleep, it's like people take an Ativan on a plane. I need to sleep on the plane and I'm a bit anxious. I'll take that. Okay. And then you sleep for the plane ride. You're not supposed to take it every single day. It is really inappropriate to do that for sleep. And there's other things that you could prescribe for sleep as opposed to this.
I've heard Ativan and 2 glasses of red wine, and you sleep the entire way from Toronto to New
Oh my
Delhi.
gosh, combining benzodiazepines and alcohol is something that kills a lot of people. Many celebrities have died from that. So you
Okay.
need to be,
Glad
because
I
they
recommended.
both depress your central nervous system. So you can't, it's very dangerous to do things like that. So basically, this time in June 2009, there's many hours and hours that Michael Jackson has insomnia, and Conrad Murray gave him a bunch of these drugs to work. So then Jackson asked for his milk in quotation marks. So milk is propofol. The reason it's called milk, or he calls it milk, is because he's weird. But the other reason is because it looks like milk. In fact, one of the names for it is milk of amnesia, because it looks like a milky substance, and it's a play on the milk of magnesia, so milk of amnesia, because it
I
will
got it. I
put you to
got your little
sleep.
pun.
And
I got your fun
so
joke.
it basically, to be stable, it has to be created as an emulsion using soybean oil and lecithin. Okay, so you combine these with the drug. The drug is actually called 2,6-diisopropylphenol. That's the actual name of the drug. And so you combine this, and then it comes like this, as this emulsion. And so when you look at it, it's very unusual, because we don't usually inject drugs that look like a milky substance, but that's what it is. It's actually invented by this guy named John B. Glenn, so not the other John Glenn, but he was a veterinarian and researcher, a chemical company in the UK called Imperial Chemical Industries. And this was around the 70s it was kind of developed. And he actually won something called the Lasker Award. The Lasker Awards are for medicine, and they are American awards. They're called the American Nobels.
What?
The Lasker Awards often predict by several years who will win the Nobel Prize in medicine. And so he won that in 2018 for developing propofol. So maybe we'll just talk, since we're on the subject, we'll just talk a bit about propofol, and then we'll get back to the story of what happened with Michael Jackson and his death. And then you can probably answer your question about why this is quite unusual that his doctor did this. So what is it used for? Propofol is basically used for general anesthesia, to induce general anesthesia. So this is why when you said the anesthesiologist would take him down and bring him back up, this is what anesthesiologists do when people are having surgery.
Right, and just to be 100% clear, this emulsion, the milk, is injectable.
Yes,
you inject
you
it.
get it as an
Okay, it's
injection.
always via syringe.
Yeah,
That's how
exactly,
you're
exactly.
not, when you say milk, I think somebody chugging it at night. But okay.
No, don't do that. And so,
Okay.
people who've had surgery probably have had this. I think most people have had this. It's very commonly used. One of the advantages is a very quick onset and offset time. So it allows the anesthesiologist to control. So in other words, they can put people under, right? Like you said that the German anesthesiologist was doing for him, and they can bring him back up. Now,
so for my hernia procedure, perhaps I will be propofol.
I would say it's very, very likely that that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Okay.
And even for like getting a colonoscopy, you often will get propofol, maybe with some midazolam, one of those benzodiazepines, or something else. Or we use it sometimes for sedation for babies if they have to have a procedure, and children. Though there are some risks with long-term propofol use in children, which I can get into. So that's basically why it's used for. Now, the key is when you're doing this and sedating somebody, you're monitoring everything about them, because the main risk is that it impairs your breathing, because it's sedating you so much, it's affecting your breathing centers in your brain. So you need to be monitoring someone constantly, checking their oxygen saturation. Sometimes you need to even assist with their breathing if you're giving them too much. And anesthesiologists are experts in titrating this.
I know you keep mentioning anesthesiologists and propofol go hand in hand, but do people use it recreationally on their own without professional guidance?
It's very hard, because it has a very steep dose response curve. So in other words, you have to titrate this very carefully, otherwise you'll just die. And so it's been reported, but it's relatively rare because of this.
And what is that word you're using? Titrate?
Titrate is like, I don't know, how do you explain titrate? Like, you have to
speak to us like we're not doctors.
Titrate is like, okay, so when you're like trying to like increase the dose slightly to get a desired effect. And so if I'm titrating up a dose of a seizure medicine, anti-seizure medicine for a patient, okay, we start at 10 milligrams, then go to 12, then go to 30, try and get the required dose without having a lot of side effects, right? But things that have a very steep dose response curve, you try and do these tiny changes and suddenly you get a big effect, right? Because it just exponentially, the effect goes up. So things that have a very steep dose response curve are very difficult to titrate, and you need to be an expert in it, like an anesthesiologist would be to do it. So someone using it recreationally, apparently it causes mild euphoria and hallucinations and disinhibition, but it's very difficult to use because the chance of you dying of it are high. One interesting thing is there are a group of people who do abuse it, apparently, and that's anesthesiologists. So anesthesiologists actually have a relatively high rate of drug abuse. And again, that's maybe a subject for another podcast.
Knowledge is power, huh? Once you learn about the drugs, you
so
can just
apparently, some of them would use it if they're doing a rotation, say, where they don't have a lot of time for rest. They only have short rest periods, so they use it and then they get a very well rested feeling afterwards. But
this is quite the sales pitch, Asif.
Yeah, exactly. So,
side note, let me just ask you this while we're here: anesthetist, anesthesiologist, is there a difference?
That's a really good question. And sometimes in some areas they are used and they have different kind of meanings in terms of the person who can do it. In general, they're used interchangeably. And I'm sure some anesthesiologist is going to get upset at me because of this.
Bring it on. Bring it on. We'll bring you on the show.
In general, those terms are used interchangeably. Yeah, good question.
So recreational use, not that common. You were saying that one of the risks is you can stop breathing. That's probably the worst risk. Sounds pretty bad. What are the other risks associated with this?
Yeah, some are minor, some are more serious. One of the more common side effects is pain when you inject it, because the propofol actually can activate some pain receptors that are found on sensory nerves. So if you pre-treat with lidocaine is an anesthetic that you'll get, if you say you're getting stitches and the doctor injects, around the cut beforehand or the incision beforehand to numb it, that's lidocaine or a form of that. And in fact, guess who got lidocaine before he got his propofol? Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson every night?
No, well, I don't know if every night. This time he did. And again, we'll get into exactly what happened in just a minute. Other side effects of, some of them are just kind of unusual side effects. The propofol can cause green discoloration of your urine. And on a similar area of the body, propofol can induce priapism in some individuals. Do you know what priapism is?
No, I'm still stuck on green urine not being good.
You're going to be stuck on this. Priapism is a long and prolonged erection in males. And
how does one get that?
It actually is dangerous to have this going on for a long period of time. It can cause long-term consequences. And so it's not just, we gave the injection, the person had an erection, then it stops. It keeps going on. And sometimes you actually need to have surgery to help with priapism.
Oh my God.
Like yeah, it can be very serious. So I know people are kind of snickering at it, but it can be kind of serious. So that's a very rare side effect. There's also a very serious propofol infusion syndrome. It's a rare syndrome if you're getting very high doses for a long period of time. It can occur more sometimes in young people. And this basically causes muscle breakdown, kidney failure. It's very serious. Your whole body kind of shuts down, and it slows down your heart rate so much that it can just slow it down till it goes to zero. And your heart can just stop beating. So pretty serious, and something that people who are administering it are aware of it. So obviously, a surgery is relatively short. You're probably not going to get this propofol infusion syndrome, but sometimes it's used in ICUs, because you were asking me who else is an expert on this? Anesthesiologists and ICU doctors. So sometimes people are on a propofol infusion for a long period of time. Sometimes, especially in adults, it's used for people who are having uncontrolled seizures, and sometimes they need to be on it for like days or weeks, but that's certainly going to increase your risk of developing this propofol infusion syndrome. So those are the main risks of this medication.
Okay, so getting back to the nightly milk routine.
Yeah.
Let's go through this timeline.
So it's really strange, the timeline. So I'll link to an ABC News article which went through these in detail. So basically, at 10:40 a.m., Jackson's not asleep. So a.m., not p.m. In other words, he's basically been up all night. So basically, this Dr. Murray agrees to the request to inject him with the milk, which is propofol, and lidocaine to do the numbing so he doesn't get that side effect. And presumably he had
that in his system already, but it didn't work, right? Because
No, I think this is
he
the
would take
first time in this day that he got it. I think he tried those
Oh,
other
okay.
things before. But again, remember, those other things depress your nervous system. And now you're giving them another nervous system depressant. Okay?
So this is bad practice. Like on paper, this is not,
This is
nobody would
craziness.
recommend.
Like,
It's
no
crazy.
one would ever administer this in someone's house. Like, I can't imagine someone would ever do this. This is so inappropriate. Remember, trained anesthesiologists, and I don't know what kind of doctor Conrad Murray was, trained ICU doctors, but they have all the equipment around them, right?
I mean, it is Neverland Ranch. Any equipment you needed would have
Yes.
been there, Asif.
So he got 25 milligrams of Propofol. Finally, Jackson fell asleep. No kidding. And then Murray testified he left to go to the bathroom. And then after 2 minutes came back and found that Jackson wasn't breathing and had a weak pulse. So then Conrad Murray says that he testified that he, of course, because he went to court, and we'll find the outcome in just a minute. You probably know what happened to Conrad Murray. Tried to revive Michael Jackson for about 10 minutes by doing CPR, and then he gave him a drug called flumazenil. Flumazenil is used to counteract the effects of certain sedating drugs, but it only works for benzodiazepines, diazepam, lorazepam, and midazolam. It wouldn't work necessarily for propofol. So he gives him this, and then basically Murray gave Michael Jackson CPR on a bed, not a hard surface, and that's the standard of care is to do it on a hard surface. So he should have moved him to the ground to do this.
Well, doesn't feel like Murray's too into standard of care, you know?
And then he just did one hand chest compressions for some reason. That's not how you're supposed to do chest compressions.
Just putting his finger on.
The problem is he didn't call 911 immediately. He said it's because there was no landline telephone in the house. This is 2009, by the way. And he didn't know the house's exact address. And then apparently it was strange because eventually law enforcement found that he had made several phone calls from his cell phone at the time.
Sure. Yeah. I killed Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
What do I do? I'm sure there was a bunch of those.
So
panic-stricken.
eventually he called the security guards, and the security guard finally called 911 at 12:21 p.m., like almost 2 hours after he was found in this state. And so paramedics got there in about 5 minutes. I guess they figured out the address pretty quickly and then found that he was not breathing and had no pulse when they arrived. They did CPR for 42 minutes at the house. Now, again, we can also talk about CPR on a future episode, but this is not good, doing CPR on someone for 42 minutes. It's basically a lost cause at this point. And then there's a few different accounts, but basically the paramedics and the LA Fire Department said he was in full cardiac arrest. This did not change when he went to the hospital. Arrived at the hospital at 1:14 p.m. So already he's at the hospital quicker than it took this doctor to eventually figure out about calling 911. And they tried to resuscitate him for another hour at the hospital. And then he was declared dead at 2:26 at the age of 50 years old, 15 years ago. And so they found this, he had the propofol. They also found a bunch of these benzodiazepines in his system as well. And in August, the coroner deemed his death a homicide. So Conrad Murray was charged. And by the way, Conrad Murray made $150,000, not a year, Ali, a month for being Jackson's personal physician. Right. So then when someone's paying you that much money, I guess you just do whatever they say, ? So he was found guilty in 2011 of involuntary manslaughter, and then he received the maximum sentence of 4 years in prison, and I believe he was released after 2 years on parole because of, the issue of prison overcrowding. So that is the story. So to answer your initial question, Ali,
I mean, there's two more stories there about how involuntary manslaughter is only 4 years, given what he actually did, and also prison overcrowding is a whole other
yeah, that's right.
story reason to anyway.
Yeah.
Hopefully he's not practicing anymore, but that's a whole other thing.
But to answer your question, so no, this is not a typical practice. This was extremely unusual. You really can't do this. It's so unusual that this happened. Now, in case people are wondering about the other drugs that have sadly killed celebrities, Prince died of an opioid overdose, actually.
Administered by somebody
He was
else as well, or
prescribed by a doctor, but I don't think that was the case for Prince. And
Okay.
Matthew Perry died of a ketamine overdose, and he was getting ketamine therapy. Again, I'm not quite sure of exactly who gave it to him, though he had a psychiatrist and an anesthesiologist involved in his care. So that ketamine was implicated in his death and was found to be around the level that would cause general anesthesia. So I would say my understanding is Prince's death is a bit different. He had opioid addiction issues for a while before he passed away. I think Matthew Perry's might be a bit more similar to Michael Jackson's, but again, I think that criminal probe is still underway. Yeah, the article I read was from like June 26, 2024. So I think that we're still kind of learning more about that.
Okay, so the moral of the story today, we don't often have a moral, but I think there is one. You can be an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime talent and still be a despicable human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
More than one thing can be true at once.
And I think we have to, as I said, think, and reflect on why we have such a hard time believing that. It's such a, and the complicated nature of this. It's difficult. And the other moral of the story is do not prescribe propofol to someone in their house to help them go to sleep. That is not appropriate. But as Ali mentioned, hopefully we will do a future episode on insomnia and some of the other topics we talked about. I think CPR is a good one to talk a bit about that. Always good to review that for the average person. But let us know. Reach out to us, drvcomedian@gmail.com, Dr. V Comedian on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are everywhere. Ali, anything you got going on in July?
In July, I'm doing a lot of comedy in and around Toronto as I prepare for a comedy special that I'm recording in September.
What? I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's a true story. And you're invited, of course.
Oh, thanks.
And then I'm doing a second season of a show called You're My Hero. I have a few episodes on that. I play a degenerate boss. Excited for that role.
I mean, that's kind of casting with type.
True story.
But one thing, Ali, just remember that although I'm a doctor...
I know what you're about to say.
What?
You're about to say when somebody comes to your house and they ask you for milk,
just give
be very careful which milk you give them.
Just give them the kind from the cow, or alternately oat, or soy, or almond. But remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye.